taking a look at the crypto markets, let's discuss more about the charts with none other than Fairlead Strategies founder and managing partner, Katie Stockton. Hello, Katie. Happy September.
Oh, yeah, thanks. You too.
This is always the exciting month in trading, and I know you're all excited about the charts here that you have. We have several. I kind of want to look at the first chart we have here is Bitcoin, because you kind of see Bitcoin in a cloudy situation. Explain how cloudy it really is for Bitcoin.
Well, it's a really good way to put it, Lawrence. The cloud model that you see on the chart, it's the shaded area, and it's a trend-following model based on price solely, and it is really widely used by FX traders. Now, we see that it has held a lot of relevance for Bitcoin and many other altcoins as well, in that the last relief rally, or the sort of intermediate term up move, met resistance right at the upper boundary of that cloud, and therein it kind of preserved the downtrend that started in 2022. So now, unfortunately, we have a corrective phase that left that resistance intact, and that does reflect weak intermediate term momentum. So we have some setbacks here on the chart. There's very strong support that's just below current levels, and you'll see that it's roughly 25,200. It defines former resistance, which was the upper boundary of a trading range. It'd be a natural place for Bitcoin to stabilize, at least temporarily. However, we have seen some others, including Ether, take out equivalent support, so that doesn't give us much peace of mind.
Yeah, I kind of want to take a look at that Ether chart, because again, Ether and Bitcoin are so highly correlated that you wonder if Ether is sort of I don't want to say leading the situation, or at least serving as a tell for Bitcoin, but it certainly has some scary warnings for people who are trading Bitcoin. Correct? We have that
I would
up there.
wonder the same. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so with the Ether chart, I mean, they have been very positively correlated and actually somewhat neutral relative strength between the two of late. But it is within the context of a broader relative uptrend favoring Bitcoin. We tend to usually see Ether underperform when both are moving lower, because it's seen as a bit riskier perhaps than Bitcoin, or Bitcoin just being the stalwart in the cryptocurrency markets. So right now, we have a relatively fresh breakdown in Ether below some support. It puts next support around 1530, which is based on the bottom boundary, that cloud that you see. So there is, of course, room to that level. You see that there's downside momentum per the weekly MACD indicator that's pictured on our chart. And that means that oversold conditions might not be something to get excited about, or at least not yet.
The chart we have up actually is the relative price of Bitcoin, and it priced as ETH. And so when it goes up, that's Bitcoin strength. And I don't want to say Bitcoin strengthening against ETH, because they're both going down, but it's more like ETH is weakening more steadily or more severely, if you will, than Bitcoin in that chart.
So that's right. So it's a relative strength comparison. Mm-hmm.
Right. So in this situation, you see that as an uptrend. In other words, that they might both be falling, but ETH is going to fall for some time in the future more than Bitcoin. Correct? Is that how to interpret that chart?
Yeah, the relative strength, of course, will be a read on just how they relate to one another. It won't give you a sense of what's happening in absolute terms. In a market where both are going down in absolute terms, we would expect Ether to underperform in that environment, given, again, its sort of position as or perception perhaps as being a bit riskier, but also potentially higher reward than Bitcoin. So it does depend on whether they're going up or down in absolute terms usually, the way we see that ratio play out. But the long-term trend is gradual, and it does support Bitcoin still, even with what we've seen of late.
Everyone's been talking about ETFs. We, of course, have the Ether Futures ETF that folks are thinking may be approved by the end of the year. If that does get approved, do you see Ether overtaking Bitcoin and maybe something a little bit different happening?
Well, I think anything that fosters institutional demand for cryptocurrencies is probably a positive for the whole space longer term. It doesn't mean that it has a real short-term impact or anything that's meaningful. Next year, for example, we did see a favorable reaction on the GBTC news recently from Bitcoin, but it was really just a blip on the chart. I think it's folks sort of anticipating that as ultimately being a positive, but I don't think it's really necessarily a near-term positive. But anything that does foster that institutional adoption, especially if it is lopsided towards one and not the other, well, then that would probably favor that cryptocurrency in terms of its sort of uptake.
All right, Katie. And finally, we need to take a look at this very cool animated chart that you sent to us. And I have to say, you are the first guest since I've been on this show, which has been like a few months now, who sent an animated chart, and I love it. It shows the 12-week. Lawrence?
It seems like the graphic was designed by someone who spent a lot of time at Phish concerts, I think.
It's yes, perhaps a little trippy, right? But it is a great way to visualize sort of normalized relative performance in the cryptocurrency market. So what we've done there is taken the top 10 sort of market cap oriented cryptocurrencies and taken their ratios versus Bitcoin. So using Bitcoin as the anchor being represented by the crosshairs in that graph. And anything that's pointing up and to the right is outperforming Bitcoin with stronger momentum. As they kind of hook over, well, they're still, outperforming, but doing so with less momentum is the idea. And I know you were just discussing Solana quite a bit. You see that Solana is one that still has a very favorable relative trajectory versus Bitcoin. And this is a 12-week view, so that provides an intermediate term takeaway. We can look at this kind of comparison, which is called a relative rotation graph, and we can look at it on a daily time frame, weekly, monthly, so you can really sort of be fractal in how you're analyzing the time frames. And what I think is sometimes interesting from our perspective is when you can see, a shift perhaps from risk on to risk off, or some kind of emerging leadership on the altcoin front.
And lastly, Litecoin is seeing a drop off. Why do you think that is?
Oh, I don't know why. The chart won't tell us that answer, unfortunately, but we know that it is. And my hope is that folks will see that and can infer what's happening there. And listen, if it's happening before there is any, sort of obvious negative news or influence around Litecoin, well, perhaps it's a heads up that these rotations are, suggesting that investors are less interested in it for some reason. So it basically deserves more research is the way I'd see that.
Katie, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Of course. Have a good day.
That was Fairlead Strategies founder and managing partner, Katie Stockton.